Today we're diving into a story that's as complicated as it is important. The political and legal changes that reshaped the lives of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in Canada between 1850 and 1890. This wasn't just a time of laws and treaties. It was a time of struggle, resilience, and huge impacts on the people who called this land home. Let's get started. First up are the Robinson Treaties of 1850. Imagine being told your home is now someone else's, and all you get is a promise of some land and a bit of money each year. That's what happened to First Nations in Ontario. These treaties allowed settlers to access huge tracts of land for mining and settlement, promising reserves, hunting and fishing rights, and annual payments in return. While the government framed these agreements as fair, they heavily favored settlers, leaving Indigenous communities with less land and fewer resources. Now let's fast forward to the Manitoba Act of 1870, a law born out of the Red River Resistance. The Métis people, led by Louis Riel, stood up to the Canadian government to protect their land and culture. The act promised Métis land rights and the creation of Manitoba as a province. Sounds good, right? Well, not so fast. The government introduced the scrip system, which was supposed to give Métis families land, but instead became a tool for land speculators. Many Métis lost their land and were pushed further west, facing even more challenges. Then came the numbered treaties 1 through 7, signed between 1871 and 1877. These agreements were supposed to provide reserves, farming tools, and education for First Nations in exchange for their vast lands. But the government didn't always hold up its end of the deal. Broken promises meant reserves were often too small and resources were scarce. For First Nations, this was a drastic change, forcing them to live on reserves and adapt to new ways of life while losing their traditional lands. One of the most damaging legal changes was the Indian Act of 1876. Imagine a law that decides who you are, where you can live, and even what you can celebrate. The Indian Act did all that and more. It banned cultural practices like potlatches and sun dances, created a patriarchal system of governance, and treated First Nations people as wards of the state. This wasn't about protection, it was about control, stripping away autonomy and cultural identity. In the courts, the St. Catharines milling case of 1888 became a defining moment. This case decided that First Nations didn't own their land, they just used it under the government's permission. It set a dangerous precedent, further weakening Indigenous control over their territories. Meanwhile, in 1880, an order in council claimed Canada's sovereignty over Arctic lands and waters, ignoring Inuit governance and knowledge of the region. This move was part of Canada's push to expand its territory, but it marginalized Inuit communities and disrupted their traditional ways of life. These changes didn't just affect people at the time, they had ripple effects that are still felt today. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples faced loss of land, culture, and autonomy. The scrip system displaced Métis families. The Indian Act enforced policies that created lasting inequalities. But through it all, Indigenous communities showed incredible strength and resilience, standing up for their rights and fighting to preserve their cultures. Understanding these events helps us see how history isn't just about the past. It's about the ongoing story of people striving for justice and recognition. Let's keep learning and reflecting on how we can support these efforts today.